Hi, this is Akiva Hersh. I'm the author of Boy in the Hole, and I'm with David Joyce, the narrator, who narrated the book, which is now available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. And I wanted to talk with David about a few things. David, uh, tell me about, in this book, there's several different characters. In addition to Jacob, who's the main character, who's a young boy, and he
Hmm.
grows up throughout the novel. There's also his mother Rose, his grandmother Audrey, his father Edwin, another set of grandparents, Elaine and Thomas Senior. Tell me, how you, as you were producing this, how you created the voices for some of these characters.
Well, there's several factors that were involved. First off, I tried to come up with voices that would fit the role that they play. Rose has a much more dramatic role than Edwin, for instance, so I needed to focus a lot more on her voice being notable. And she has a wider range of responses, everything from pathetic to snarling fierce.
Right.
And I had to work a lot more on, I wanted the accent. You had coached me a good bit on the accent, the region, things along those lines. I wanted the accent.
The reason that's a good point that you mentioned that this is an autobiographical fiction, which means this novel is largely, it's all fiction, but it's based in some parts of reality of my life. And so, yeah, I was able to give you some portraits of these characters, and you then put your own interpretation on them.
Absolutely, yes. Edwin, if I did the accent the way I was hearing him in my head, he would have sounded too much like Rose. And I wound up having to go with a different voice for him that I would have preferred ideally. But I needed it to be distinct enough so that when the dialogue is going on, it's recognizable who it is that's speaking each time.
So one of the challenges was in this novel is we have a lot of Southern characters, but we
Mm-hmm.
also have on the Murtaugh side, which would be Jacob's father's family, a lot of New York accents. How did you, as you were recording, how did you separate out and keep from sounding too Southern when you needed a New York accent?
One of the keys to doing accents is you need what I call a hit on a particular kind of character. Typically, it's a key phrase or an image in my mind that I'll fix that seems to typify that, and I use that as the launching point for the accent. For instance, if I'm going to do a West Texas accent, I grew up with a man who grew up in West Texas, and the phrase for me that launches into West Texas is, well, and then when I start to do it with that term, I can slide into the accent so much more easily. And
So then, within a few sentences, you'd have to jump to Elaine, which is Jacob's grandmother on his father's side, who was from Brooklyn.
mhm.
So, how did you switch into her?
um, back in the 70s, there were some sitcoms that had female characters set in Brooklyn, and that exaggerated stereotype, the coffee, and you have to go into the vowels. And then I made it a little more brassy, and that's how I worked towards it.
Who is the most challenging, you think?
The Friend in the Mountains, the Ozark accent, that was the most challenging for me
The
because I grew up in Texas. I can do hick, but hillbilly is not
right.
one I had nearly as much experience with.
Okay. So, what did you do to kind of prepare for that?
A good bit of coaching, and there were several times I had to redo it in order to. The hillbilly shifts the focus of the words. It doesn't drag out towards the end nearly as much as Southern, and especially like Texas or Deep South. It front loads the words, and so I had to handle them a bit differently, and I had to practice it several times, even to get bits that would be acceptable to my editor.
Um, so, you had read the book twice before you actually were asked to narrate it.
Yes.
Um, what about the novel drew you to deciding to go ahead and do it? What aspects of the novel appealed to you?
There are some elements in the book that are decidedly unpleasant. It's got a harsh spin on the world, but at the same time, it's about someone conquering, climbing out of that harshness, learning to change and adapt despite being in literally a sick environment. And I really feel that of modern novels that I've read, it seems like it's easy to fall into this grim, there is no good, everything is terrible sort of a spin. The postmodern stuff sometimes can fall into that trap, or they fall into this meaningless trap. And this book avoids either of those two. It does not become meaningless. It is actually about how to relevantly begin to shift your experience so that what's going on around you isn't what controls you.
In the book, the methodology that Jacob learns is called quantum change.
Mm-hmm.
That is drawn from a real life therapeutic model, which you have training in. It's not called quantum change; it's called something else.
Mm-hmm.
But how much of that experience and training helped you in understanding where the character, especially Jacob, was coming from?
It it's one of those components that it absolutely makes some of the scenes make more sense. It really does. That if you know what's going on with some of the components he's had training in, then you can see what he's doing. And while absolutely the book is clear what he accomplishes with it, sometimes you don't always know what's going on behind the scenes. And having training in some of those particular styles, the therapeutic modalities and such, it was actually kind of fun to read because it's a different scenario set in a fictional setting. And we're able to play with how you can experience your world in a more useful manner.
Uh, so the last thing I wanted to ask you was the novel was written from a third person omniscient narrator who has the ability to head hop. And the
Mm-hmm.
style that I wrote the novel in is more of the James Joyce, Virginia Woolf stream of consciousness. So in 1 minute, you could be doing a narrator piece, and then all of a sudden, that narrator now is actually Rose's thoughts or Jacob's thoughts. How did you bring that out so naturally in the book so that it wasn't jarring but yet fit within the writing style?
What I had to do was simply begin to shift my state. The accent for me is state based. And
By,
so
by state, you mean
your internal feeling, your internal representation, there's a physiology element of how you hold your body, how you hold your head, but it's also, it's hard to describe, but it's like in your head kind of a feeling that it's not quite emotions, but a West Texas drawl, when done in a fun way, is very different from the East Texas, a little bit snappier, got a front load, and you goose your vowels, and it feels different on the inside when you say these things. So as you begin to shift in a narrator towards the drawl, you begin to just add in nuanced elements, and then after a while, you've begun to just drop down all the way into it. And then as you shift out of those thoughts and more towards the narrator, you begin to slide away from that and the feeling changes along with it.
so. Did you mark out for yourself what was narrator and what was character, or was that something that seemed to flow as you read the novel?
It has to flow in this particular style of a novel because there are points when no one can tell whether that's truly the narrator or
Right,
truly the character's thoughts. You
right.
have to have it flow. There's no sharp delineation in several of the sequences.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation about the audio version of Boy in the Hole. Please, if you're watching this, go to akivahersh.com. That's AKIVAHERSH.com, where you'll find a link to audiobooks, and there you'll find a sample of David reading the first chapter for the first 5 minutes. You can get a feel for what it sounds like. And then when you're ready to purchase, you can click, and that sound, that it's on SoundCloud. It will take you right to the purchase page at Audible or wherever your favorite place to buy audiobooks is. All right, thank you so much.
You're absolutely welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.